What would you risk for one night that could destroy everything you've worked for? The words shattered in the darkness. Just one night. Josephine's hands froze on the wine glass she was washing, soap suds dripping between her trembling fingers. The voice behind her made her entire body go rigid, every nerve ending suddenly alive with a dangerous awareness she'd been fighting for months. He stood in the kitchen doorway at midnight, still in his dress shirt from dinner, his tie loosened, the top two buttons undone to reveal the edge of dark ink crawling up his throat. Kim Soo-hyun, the man Seoul's underworld whispered about in fear. The billionaire mafia boss whose empire stretched across 3 continents. And the man Josephine had come to destroy. His dark eyes burned with something that made her breath catch, something raw and unguarded that never appeared in daylight. The kitchen's dim light carved shadows across his sharp jawline, highlighting the silver piercing glinting at his eyebrow, the stubble darkening his face after the long evening. Strands of black hair fell across his forehead, disheveled in a way that made him look almost human. Almost. But Josephine knew better. She'd spent 6 months in this cold Seoul mansion, playing the role of the quiet American maid with the low-cut natural hair and curves that made the other staff whisper. 6 months cleaning his floors while searching his files. 6 months serving his dinner while memorizing his schedules. 6 months investigating the family she believed had murdered her father in a business deal gone wrong in Lagos 3 years ago. And now, at midnight, with his wife asleep upstairs and the rest of the household gone, he was asking her for one night. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, crashing into the sink. Neither of them moved. He stepped closer, and Josephine could smell his cologne mixed with whiskey and something darker, something that spoke of closed-door meetings and blood-signed contracts. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face neutral, kept playing the part even as every instinct screamed at her to run. This was forbidden in every possible way. He was her target. She was his employee. He was married to one of Seoul's most powerful women. And she was a foreigner, a black woman in a world that already looked at her sideways, investigating a crime that could get her killed if anyone discovered the truth. But when his hand reached past her to grip the edge of the sink, caging her in without touching her, Josephine felt something shift inside her chest. Something she couldn't afford to feel. His voice came low and rough, barely above a whisper, and it sent electricity racing down her spine. He wasn't asking. He was confessing. Confessing that he'd noticed her too, that for months he'd been watching her the way she'd been watching him, that beneath his cold exterior and her careful disguise, something dangerous had been building between them. This was the dark romance nobody talked about. The obsession that bloomed in shadows. The kind of forbidden love that destroyed empires and buried bodies. And Josephine was standing at the edge of it, knowing that one wrong move could expose everything she'd worked for, or worse, make her forget why she came here in the first place. His jaw clenched, and for the first time since she'd met him, Kim Soo-hyun looked almost vulnerable. Almost like a man who'd been starving for something real in a world built on lies and loyalty bought with fear. Josephine turned slowly to face him, her back pressed against the counter, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. She'd learned to survive in rooms full of powerful men. She'd learned to smile while planning their downfall. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, for the way her body betrayed her mission, leaning slightly toward him even as her mind screamed to maintain distance. The space between them felt electric, dangerous, like touching a live wire in the dark. One night, he'd said. But they both knew one night with someone like him would never be enough. One night would either destroy her cover or break her resolve. One night would change everything. And somewhere in the darkness of this Seoul mansion, while betrayal plotted in the rooms above and secrets festered in the walls around them, Josephine had to make a choice that would determine not just her mission, but her survival. Before we continue this dangerous game, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get a whole lot more complicated, and you won't want to miss what happens when obsession meets revenge. The question burning in the midnight air between them wasn't whether they would give in to this forbidden desire. The question was whether either of them would survive what came after. Drop a comment below. Have you ever wanted something you knew would destroy you? Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife. Sometimes it's the truth whispered in the dark by someone who should be your enemy. Kim Soo-hyun's words cut through the silence like a blade through silk. He told her he'd been watching her. Not the way a boss watches an employee, but the way a starving man watches a feast he's forbidden to touch. Every morning when she brought coffee to his office. Every evening when she cleared the dinner table while his wife complained about charity galas and designer disappointments. Every moment she thought she was invisible, he'd been studying her like she was the only real thing in his world of beautiful eyes. Josephine's pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd researched him for months before taking this position. Kim Soo-hyun, 34 years old, heir to the Kim family's legitimate pharmaceutical empire and secret ruler of Seoul's underground networks. A man who built hospitals with blood money. A man whose wedding photos showed him looking at his bride with all the warmth of a business transaction. Because that's exactly what it was. His marriage to Yoon Min-ji, daughter of Korea's third-largest chaebol family, had been a merger, not a romance. Everyone knew it. The society pages praised their power couple status, while the streets whispered about his wife's affairs with her tennis instructor and his cold indifference to everything except expanding his empire. But the way he was looking at Josephine now had nothing to do with empires or indifference. She found her voice, keeping it steady even though her hands were shaking. She asked him what he wanted, really wanted, playing the part of the confused employee even as her investigator's mind raced through possibilities. Was this a test? Had he discovered who she really was? Did he know about the flash drive hidden in her mattress, filled with copied files from his personal safe? His laugh was bitter, dark, the sound of a man who'd stopped believing in simple wants years ago. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and enemies circling. Close enough that when he finally answered, his breath ghosted across her temple, making her skin burn. He said he wanted one night where he wasn't Kim Soo-hyun. One night where he wasn't the heir or the boss or the monster everyone feared. One night with someone who looked at him like he was a man, not a title or a threat or a bank account. And when he'd seen her night, washing dishes in his kitchen at midnight because the regular staff had gone home, humming that American R&B song under her breath like she wasn't afraid of him at all, something inside him had cracked. Josephine's chest tightened. This was the moment she'd trained for, the moment when targets became vulnerable, when professional distance mattered most. But her training hadn't prepared her for the raw honesty in his voice, for the way her body responded to his proximity, for the traitorous thought that maybe, just maybe, she understood exactly what he meant. Because she was tired too. Tired of pretending to be just a maid. Tired of smiling at his wife's casual racism and the other staff's whispered judgments. Tired of sleeping alone in a foreign country, hunting ghosts of her father's death while her own life slipped away in the pursuit of revenge. And tired of lying to herself about the way her heart jumped every time he entered a room. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes directly, and asked the question that could destroy them both. She asked what happened after one night. What happened when the sun came up and reality crashed back down? What happened when his wife woke up, when the staff returned, when the dangerous game they were playing had consequences neither of them could control? His hand finally touched her, fingertips grazing her jawline with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. The touch sent fire racing through her veins, made her breath catch in her throat. This was forbidden love in its purest, most destructive form. The kind of obsession that started wars and ended dynasties. Kim Soo-hyun told her the truth then, the truth that made everything more complicated. He said his marriage was already over, had been over before it began. His wife was plotting something. He could feel it in the way she smiled at him over dinner, in the suspicious phone calls and secret meetings. He'd built his empire by reading people, by sensing betrayal before it struck, and every instinct he had was screaming that something was coming. But tonight, he didn't want to think about betrayal or empires or the enemies gathering in the shadows. Tonight, he just wanted to feel alive. With her. With Josephine, the American woman with the warm brown skin and knowing eyes who'd somehow become the only real thing in his manufactured world. Josephine felt the walls she'd built around herself start to crumble. This was more than physical attraction. This was recognition. Two people trapped in roles they never chose, seeing each other clearly for the first time. And it was terrifying because she knew what he didn't. She knew she'd come here to destroy him, to expose his family's crimes, to get justice for her father who died in a warehouse fire the Kim family had ordered to cover up a failed deal. But looking at him now, seeing past the cold exterior to the man underneath, she felt her certainty wavering. What if everything she'd been told was a lie? What if the man standing before her, confessing his loneliness in a midnight kitchen, wasn't the monster she'd been hunting? His thumb traced her lower lip, and Josephine's eyes fluttered closed for just a moment, just long enough for the investigator to disappear and the woman to emerge. Just long enough to forget that some obsessions don't just destroy you. They remake you into something unrecognizable. When she opened her eyes again, she made a decision that would change everything. She leaned into his touch, just slightly, just enough to answer the question he'd asked without words. Just enough to say yes to one night that would either save them both or bury them together. Because in the world of dark romance and billionaire obsession, in the world of forbidden love and dangerous games, sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. There are moments that divide your life into before and after. Moments where you cross a line you can never uncross. This was one of them. Kim Soo-hyun's hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her short, natural hair with a possessiveness that should have terrified her, but instead made something deep inside her chest crack wide open. He pulled her closer, eliminating the last inches of space between them, and Josephine felt the heat of his body against hers, felt the rapid beat of his heart that matched her own frantic rhythm. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he did something more intimate, more devastating. He pressed his forehead against hers and breathed her in like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for years. His other hand found her waist, spanning the curve of her hip with a grip that was both gentle and desperate, like he was afraid she might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. Josephine's hands moved on their own, sliding up his chest, feeling the expensive fabric of his shirt and the solid muscle beneath it, feeling the thundering of his heartbeat that told her he was just as affected as she was. Her fingers found the loosened tie, the open collar, the warm skin there, and she felt him shudder at her touch. This was the billionaire obsession the tabloids would never write about. Not the private jets or the penthouse suites or the expensive gifts. This was the raw, terrifying need of two people who shouldn't want each other, but couldn't seem to stop. This was the kind of forbidden love that ended in headlines or graves, and right now, Josephine didn't care which. He whispered her name then, really whispered it, and it sounded different in his deep voice with his Korean accent wrapping around the syllables. Josephine. Not the maid or Miss Williams like his wife called her with barely concealed disdain. Just her name, said like a prayer or a curse or both. And then she felt it. The shift in the air, the moment when want became decision, when the game they'd been playing for months finally reached its inevitable conclusion. His lips brushed against hers, soft at first, questioning, giving her one last chance to pull away, to remember who they were and why this was impossible. But Josephine had spent 6 months being careful. 6 months being the invisible woman in the background. 6 months denying herself everything while she hunted for answers about her father's death. And in this moment, with soul sleeping around them and danger waiting in every shadow, she chose herself. She chose the desire burning through her veins. She chose one night of being something other than a daughter seeking revenge. She kissed him back. The kiss exploded between them like a match to gasoline. His hand tightened in her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that spoke of months of restraint finally breaking. Her fingers clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, kneading him closer, drowning in the taste of whiskey and want and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. He lifted her onto the counter in one fluid motion, stepping between her thighs, and Josephine wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, feeling the hard planes of his body against her softness, feeling desired in a way she'd never experienced. Not like this. Not with this intensity that felt like it might consume them both. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, tracing a path down her neck that made her gasp, made her arch into him, made her forget every reason this was wrong. His teeth grazed the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, and when his tongue soothed the mark he'd left there, Josephine heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize, something between a moan and a plea. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes blown wide with desire, his lips swollen from their kiss, that careful control he always wore completely shattered. And he said something that stopped her heart. He said no one had ever made him feel like this. No one had ever made him forget who he was, forget the empire and the enemies and the weight of his family name. No one had ever kissed him like she was claiming him, like he belonged to her instead of to his obligations. Josephine's breath came in ragged gasps, her hands still fisted in his shirt, her body still pressed against his in a way that left nothing to imagination. She should lie. She should play the game, keep her cover, remember her mission. But something about this moment demanded truth, demanded rawness, demanded she give him something real in exchange for what he'd given her. So she told him. She told him that no one had ever touched her like this either, like she was precious and powerful all at once. No one had ever looked at her the way he did, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And no one had ever made her forget herself so completely, made her want to abandon everything she'd planned just to stay in this moment forever. His hands cupped her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks with a tenderness that contradicted the violence she knew he was capable of. This was the man who'd built an empire on fear and strategy. This was the mafia boss whose name made grown men nervous. But right now, he was just a man who'd been starving for something real, looking at her like she was everything. He asked her if she was sure. Really sure. Because once they crossed this line, there was no going back. Once they gave in to this obsession, this forbidden love that had been building between them since the first day she'd walked into his mansion, everything would change. His world was dangerous, full of enemies and betrayals and consequences that didn't forgive weakness. And wanting her, needing her the way he did, that was the most dangerous weakness of all. Josephine knew she should say no. She knew that sleeping with her target would compromise everything, would blur lines that should stay sharp, would make it impossible to complete her mission. She knew that when the truth came out, when he discovered she'd been investigating him, investigating his family, this moment would make the betrayal cut deeper. But she also knew that some chances only came once. Some nights changed you forever. And some obsessions, once they took hold, couldn't be reasoned with or denied. She pulled him back to her, answering with her body what words couldn't express, and felt him smile against her lips before the kiss turned dark and deep and desperate again. His hands slid down her sides, gripping her thighs with a possessiveness that sent electricity racing through her, and Josephine knew they were both falling into something that would either save them or destroy them completely. Outside the kitchen windows, Sol's lights glittered like false stars, and somewhere in this mansion, his wife slept peacefully, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to explode. Somewhere in the city, enemies plotted and secrets waited to be uncovered. And somewhere in her own heart, Josephine felt the careful walls of revenge beginning to crack, letting in something she hadn't felt since her father died. The possibility of love. Real, dangerous, forbidden love that didn't care about missions or justice or the price they'd both pay when morning came. They say the truth always comes at the worst possible moment. They're right. 3 hours later, Josephine lay in Kim Soo-hyun's arms in a guest room far from the master suite, far from his wife's cold designer bedroom, in a space that felt like it existed outside of reality. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his breathing finally steady after the storm they'd weathered together. The silk sheets were tangled around them, evidence of a night that had surpassed every fantasy and shattered every defense they'd both carefully constructed. He'd been right about one thing. No one had ever touched her like that before. Not with that combination of intensity and reverence, passion and tenderness. He'd mapped every curve of her body like he was memorizing a sacred text, had whispered words in Korean against her skin that she didn't understand but felt in her soul. And when he'd finally looked into her eyes at the peak of their intimacy, Josephine had seen something that terrified her more than any danger she'd faced. She'd seen a future, a possibility, a life where she wasn't hunting revenge, and he wasn't trapped in a loveless marriage. A life where they could have mornings like this, afternoons, years. And that vision was more dangerous than any weapon because it made her want to abandon everything she'd come here to do. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. Kim Soo-hyun's phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the fragile peace. He ignored it at first, pulling her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple like he could keep reality at bay through sheer will. But it buzzed again, and again. The insistent rhythm of emergency, of crisis, of the world refusing to let them have this one perfect moment. He reached for it with a sigh, and Josephine watched his expression change as he read the messages. Watched the tender lover disappear and the cold mafia boss resurface. Watched his jaw clench and his eyes go hard with the kind of fury that reminded her exactly who she was lying next to. His head of security had sent photos. Surveillance images time-stamped from earlier that evening while he'd been having dinner with his wife and the household staff. The images showed his wife, Minji, in a private room at an exclusive club in Gangnam. But she wasn't with her tennis instructor or shopping with friends like she'd claimed. She was with his rival, Park Jin-woo, the man who'd been trying to take over the Kim family's territory for 3 years. The man whose organization was responsible for the warehouse fires, the missing shipments, the murdered informants. And in these photos, Minji wasn't just meeting with him. She was kissing him, laughing with him, handing him folders that looked suspiciously like the financial documents Kim Soo-hyun kept in his private office safe. Josephine felt her blood run cold. Those folders. She'd photographed some of them herself last month, had spent hours trying to decode the numbers and names, searching for evidence of her father's murder. And now his own wife was selling those secrets to his enemy. Kim Soo-hyun's voice was deadly calm when he finally spoke, the kind of calm that preceded violence. He said he'd suspected for months, but hadn't wanted to believe it. His marriage might have been a business arrangement, but betrayal was betrayal. And this wasn't just infidelity. This was treason. His wife had been feeding information to Park Jin-woo, information that had gotten his people killed, had cost him millions in intercepted shipments, had weakened his position in Seoul's underworld hierarchy. The irony wasn't lost on Josephine. She was lying in his bed, having just given herself to him completely, and she was guilty of the exact same crime. She'd been searching his files, copying his documents, investigating his family for her own vendetta. The only difference was that his wife was working with his known enemy, while Josephine had convinced herself she was working for justice. But justice and revenge had started to look very different over the past few hours. He scrolled through more messages, his free hand still absently stroking Josephine's arm like he needed the physical connection to ground himself. His security team had uncovered more. Minji's affair with Park Jin-woo had been going on for over a year, since before the wedding. The marriage had been her idea, a way to get inside the Kim family's operation. Everything had been a setup from the beginning. And there was more. The messages detailed a planned hit. Tomorrow night, at a charity gala, Minji had insisted they attend together. Park Jin-woo's men would be waiting, positioned as catering staff and security. They were planning to kill Kim Soo-hyun in front of Seoul's elite, make it look like a random attack, and in the chaos, Park would absorb the Kim family's territory while Minji walked away with half the assets as the grieving widow. Josephine sat up, her investigator instincts overriding everything else. This changed everything. Her father's death, the warehouse fire in Lagos 3 years ago, she'd traced it back to the Kim family. But what if she'd traced it to the wrong person? What if Park Jin-woo had been operating within the Kim organization even then, using their name while pursuing his own agenda? She'd spent 6 months believing Kim Soo-hyun was responsible for her father's murder. 6 months planning his downfall. And now, lying in his bed, having just experienced something that felt like it could be love, she was faced with the possibility that she'd been hunting the wrong monster all along. Kim Soo-hyun looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He said something that shattered her completely. He said he knew she wasn't just a maid. He'd known from the beginning. A woman with her intelligence, her education evident in the way she spoke when she forgot to play the part, working as household staff? It didn't add up. He'd run a background check within a week of hiring her. Josephine Williams, daughter of Marcus Williams, American businessman who died in a warehouse fire in Lagos 3 years ago during a deal with Korean investors. A fire that had been blamed on the Kim family's negligence but had never been fully investigated. Josephine felt the world tilt beneath her. He'd known. This whole time, he'd known exactly who she was and why she was here. And he'd let her stay. Had watched her search his office, had let her photograph his files, had given her access to information that could destroy him. She started to pull away, started to reach for her clothes, the shame and confusion overwhelming. But his hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm, keeping her close. And what he said next changed everything she thought she understood about the past 6 months. He told her he'd let her investigate because he'd been investigating the same thing. Her father's death had never sat right with him. The warehouse had been Park Jin-woo's operation, using Kim family resources without authorization. By the time Kim Soo-hyun had discovered the theft, the fire had already happened, and Park had done an excellent job of making it look like standard Kim family business. He'd been gathering evidence against Park for 3 years, trying to prove what really happened, trying to bring justice for the innocent people, including her father, who died in that fire. But Park was careful, connected, and proving anything against him had been nearly impossible. Until now. Until his own wife's betrayal had finally given him the opening he needed to bring Park Jin-woo down. Josephine's mind reeled. Everything she'd believed, every assumption she'd made, had been built on lies. The man she'd come to destroy had been trying to avenge her father's death. The man she'd just given herself to had been protecting her even while knowing she was there to hurt him. And the dangerous obsession she'd felt growing between them over the past 6 months hadn't been one-sided at all. He'd been falling for her too. Falling for his enemy. Falling for the woman who was supposed to destroy him. And instead of pushing her away, instead of using his power to eliminate the threat she represented, he'd let her in. Had given her the one night she'd asked for. Had shown her a vulnerability he'd never shown another living soul. This was dark romance at its most devastating. This was forbidden love complicated by betrayal and redemption, by misunderstanding and truth, by obsession, and something that looked dangerously like fate. Sometimes love doesn't save you. Sometimes it just gives you something worth dying for. The charity gala glittered with Seoul's most powerful elite, diamonds and danger dripping from every chandelier in the grand ballroom. Josephine stood near the champagne fountain in a borrowed designer gown, her natural hair styled elegantly, playing the part of Kim Soo-hyun's new executive assistant, the promotion he'd announced that morning to explain her presence at his side. His wife, Min-ji, smiled her practiced smile across the room, stunning in red silk, playing the devoted spouse while her lover's assassins waited for their moment. But Josephine wasn't just playing a part anymore. She was armed. She was ready. And she'd made a choice that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. She'd chosen him. Chosen to stand with Kim Soo-hyun against the people who'd actually killed her father. Chosen to break her cover, abandon her careful investigation, and fight alongside the man she'd come to destroy. Because somewhere between midnight confessions and morning revelations, between his honest touch and the truth about her father's death, revenge had transformed into something else entirely. Justice. And maybe, impossibly, love. Kim Soo-hyun moved through the crowd with his usual controlled grace, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on his latest hospital donation, playing the respectable billionaire philanthropist, while his mind calculated angles of attack and probability of survival. Josephine could see the tension in his shoulders, could read the alertness in his eyes even as he smiled. He'd positioned his own security throughout the room, had warned his most trusted people about the threat. But Park Jin-woo was smart, and traitors were already inside the gates. The first sign came at 8:47. A waiter Josephine didn't recognize from the pre-event briefing, moving too purposefully toward Kim Soo-hyun's position. She caught the bulge under his jacket, saw the way his hand drifted toward it, saw the moment he made his decision to strike. And she moved. Years of self-defense training, months of preparation, weeks of watching and learning the rhythms of violence in Seoul's underworld, all converged in a single fluid motion. Josephine intercepted the waiter, her champagne glass accidentally shattering against his gun hand, her elbow driving into his solar plexus before anyone else even registered the threat. The gun clattered to the marble floor, and she kicked it away with her designer heel as security descended. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Screams, movement, the carefully orchestrated evening dissolving into panic. And in that panic, Park Jin-woo made his move. 3 more men, positioned at different corners of the room, drew weapons. Not trying for subtlety anymore, just raw violence and the element of surprise. They were aiming for Kim Soo-hyun, but they hadn't accounted for Josephine. Hadn't known that the quiet American maid was actually trained in combat, had connections to private investigators and security consultants, had spent her entire adult life preparing to face the people who destroyed her family. She'd just never expected to use those skills protecting her target instead of destroying him. Kim Soo-hyun moved with deadly precision, years of martial arts training evident in every controlled strike. His security team engaged the attackers, and the grand ballroom transformed into a war zone dressed in evening wear. Josephine stayed close to him, watching his back, trusting him to watch hers, fighting in perfect synchronization like they'd been doing this together for years instead of minutes. And then she saw Min-ji, saw the wife moving through the chaos toward the exit, saw the satisfied smile on her face as she thought she'd succeeded, thought her husband was dead or dying, and she was about to collect her reward. Saw the phone in her hand, probably calling Park Jin-woo to confirm the hit. Something primal surged through Josephine. This woman had orchestrated her father's death, had used Kim Soo-hyun, had betrayed everything for greed and power. And she was about to walk away clean. Not tonight. Josephine crossed the ballroom in seconds, blocking Min-ji's path to the exit. The other woman's expression shifted from triumph to shock to rage in rapid succession. She hissed something in Korean, something vicious about Americans, and maids knowing their place. But Josephine had stopped caring about place or propriety or anything except the truth. She told Min-ji in perfect, clear English that it was over. Told her they knew about Park Jin-woo, about the planned assassination, about the years of betrayal. Told her that the security footage was already with the authorities, that the game was finished, that justice was finally coming for the people who'd killed innocent men in warehouse fires, and called it business. Min-ji's face twisted with hatred, and she reached into her clutch. But Kim Soo-hyun was already there, his hand catching his wife's wrist before she could draw the small pistol hidden inside. His voice was cold, final, the voice of a man passing judgment. He told her she was done. Done using his name, done hiding behind his family's reputation, done destroying lives for her own ambition. Police sirens wailed outside, growing closer. Kim Soo-hyun had made sure his evidence reached the right people, had ensured that when the smoke cleared, Park Jin-woo and everyone involved in the conspiracy would face real consequences. Not just underworld justice, but legal prosecution, public exposure, everything. And as Min-ji was led away in handcuffs, still screaming threats and curses, as the ballroom slowly emptied of guests and filled with investigators, as the reality of what they'd just survived settled over them, Kim Soo-hyun finally turned to Josephine. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheek where blood from a minor cut had dried, and his eyes held everything he couldn't say in public. Gratitude. Wonder. Something that looked like the beginning of forever, if they were brave enough to reach for it. She'd broken her cover to save him. Had revealed everything she was, everything she could do, had risked her own life without hesitation because in that moment, his survival had mattered more than her revenge, more than her mission, more than anything. And he saw her. Really saw her. Not the maid or the investigator or the woman seeking justice for her father. Just Josephine. The woman who'd given him one night that turned into a lifetime promise. The woman who'd shown him what it felt like to be wanted for himself rather than his power. The woman who'd fought beside him when everyone else had betrayed him. The dark romance that had started in a midnight kitchen had survived its baptism by fire. The forbidden love between a billionaire mafia boss and the woman sent to destroy him had transformed into something real, something worth fighting for, something that might actually have a future. As dawn broke over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they stood together on the balcony of his office building, away from the police and the press and the aftermath of the night's violence. Josephine leaned against him, exhausted but alive, feeling his arm around her waist like an anchor. He asked her what happened now. Where they went from here, with his marriage dissolved by arrest, her mission transformed by truth, both of them exposed and vulnerable and somehow stronger for it. Josephine smiled, the first real smile she'd worn since her father died 3 years ago. She told him they started over. Started honest. Started with the truth instead of lies, with partnership instead of betrayal, with the kind of love that came from really seeing someone and choosing them anyway. She told him she wanted more than one night. She wanted mornings and afternoons and years. Wanted to know him without the games, without the danger, without the pretense. Wanted to build something real in the ruins of everything they'd destroyed together. And Kim Soo-hyun, the man who'd built an empire on control and strategy and never showing weakness, did something he'd never done before. He let himself hope. Let himself imagine a future where he wasn't just surviving but living. Where the woman in his arms stayed there not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He kissed her as the sun rose over Seoul, and it felt like a promise. Like redemption. Like the beginning of something that had been worth every moment of pain and betrayal and dangerous obsession that had led them here. Because sometimes the best love stories don't start with love at all. Sometimes they start with revenge and lies and forbidden desire. Sometimes they start with two broken people hunting each other in the dark, finding each other instead. Sometimes they start with one night that changes everything. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to break cover, to risk everything, to choose love over revenge and truth over comfortable lies, sometimes those stories get a happy ending after all. If you want to see more stories of dark romance, forbidden love, and billionaire obsession that break all the rules, hit that subscribe button right now. Because trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The question isn't whether love can survive betrayal and danger. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out. Drop a comment and tell me, would you risk everything for one night that could change your life forever?